Presentation is about the professionalisation model that I was responsible for encouraging the government to develop in England and Wales, and I'm going to talk it through effectively as a case study with potential for wider adoption. And just going to briefly touch on the historic development of training and leadership, just a short piece at the front, because you need to know where you've come from. I'll talk about the review of police training and leadership that I was asked to undertake by the government. It was the Cameron government with Theresa May as a Home Secretary back in 2010, 2011. And then what that means for the training of recruits, supervisors, specialists, and leaders, and some of the implications of that for policing. And it's probably in UK terms, I mean, you can go back into the Victorian era if you want, but I think the most sensible starting point for a discussion about the development of training in England and Wales, and to some extent also Scotland and Northern Ireland, is the Desborough Committee in 1922, and take that forward to the Royal Commission on the Police in the 1960s. And the reason for starting with Desborough is that Desborough came immediately after a strike after the end of the First World War, a strike about pay and conditions, and a strike that was really about the status of the occupation of policing. The British police were not alone in that sense of having gone through a Victorian era not particularly well paid, and certainly from a frontline point of view, not particularly highly regarded, with a cadre of senior officers usually imposed from the military, and not often particularly capable, to be frank, and certainly not well endowed with policing skills. And what Desborough did was to not only focus on police pay, he also focused on conditions of service and the importance of having a national standard of recruitment and training, and standardizing what had been an extraordinarily diverse set of examinations for sergeant and inspector, with putting a lot more emphasis beyond the pure legal side of it into developing the type of standards that related to the way in which the police went around their job. The Second World War also brought a National Police Staff College, and again, this is fairly familiar territory. There was a broad move towards professionalising the leadership of policing, not just in England and Wales, but more broadly around the world. The National Police Staff College, which started at a place called Ryton and then went to Bramshill, which is in the picture, was intended to provide national training for the senior officers across the UK, and in particular, after the Royal Commission in 1962. A focus on accelerated promotion, bringing people in with graduate qualifications, and then developing a program for senior leaders. The flaw in that model is that it was almost entirely focused on promotion. The only place that you could get that type of training support was at a college in which the entry point was being promoted to a rank, not a sense of a professional model in which the skills and competencies required to improve the role were central to the approach. And come the 2010, the National Police Staff College was sold. It's actually up for 10.5 million at the moment. And the Home Secretary, the then Home Secretary Theresa May, and I had a very difficult debate about the future importance of central training. In philosophical terms, she didn't believe in it. I said we'd be about the only place in the world where the most senior leadership of a national policing function did not have a central place to train, and I thought that was absolutely crucial for the standards of policing. But I went further and argued that we needed to have a modern 21st century approach to developing the professional skills and the professional model in policing. I won the argument thanks to the then Prime Minister David Cameron, who commissioned me to report to Parliament with a review of police leadership and training in 2010 to report in 2011. And that's the letter I wrote when I sent the report in. But what I particularly focused on is that if you're going to do something like this, you need to start the professional model from a set of principles about what the profession of policing is about. I started from the principles that fundamentally it related to the police's role in sustaining the rule of law. So democratic accountability was fundamental. Secondly, that the police needed, in order to be able to achieve the things they needed to achieve, to be seen to be legitimate. That meant, in particular, they needed to understand, for example, things like procedural justice that would encourage the public to comply. It's simply impossible in a democratic country to enforce without consent, because the public simply won't do what they're asked to do. And escalating the force upwards is not a sign of a democratic country at all. Thirdly, the police needed to be evidence-based. They needed to use the evidence about their profession. In order to improve doing things, you don't just carry on doing the same thing time and again. That's a recipe for failure. You need to understand the outcomes and the outputs that you achieved, and how you might improve that by doing something in a better way, or indeed doing less to achieve the same, or indeed more. In UK terms, we needed to be nationally coherent, and that meant nationally coherent both within England and Wales, but also across the whole of the United Kingdom. And I went further actually and suggested we needed to be internationally coherent as well, because increasingly transnational policing is important. For example, it's inconceivable that you'd be effective in tackling terrorism and radicalization if you weren't able to be internationally coherent. And last but not least, the professional model that I was seeking to develop needed to have people working for it who were capable, competent, and did things in a cost-effective way, because budgets are always going to be constrained. My proposed model was for a professional body for policing. The report I did included an analysis of comparative professional bodies in a range of other professions, not just medical, but legal, in some of the semi-professionals, some of the new professions like accountancy, etc. And what became very apparent was the importance of the profession itself having a strong role in the direction of travel and a strong role in the development of standards. I felt that the president of that profession should be elected from the police service. It should have an executive board from across the police service with independent members. And in our terms, there was a big change going on in the governance of policing. I felt there should be a separation between the professional body and the emerging police and crime commissioners who are responsible for the local governance of policing. I lost that one, I think, largely because there's one thing you can't do is keep politicians out of something like this. And I had a pretty vigorous debate with the Home Secretary about this. I don't think she necessarily bought the principles that I was trying to get across, but she did buy, as it says here, the key recommendations. And the point about one of the points about the review is I didn't give her very many recommendations, but and those that I did give, I made damn sure were underpinned by strong evidence and were clearly articulated, so that the Home Office could easily get them through and implement them. I am attracted to establishing a police professional body, which was, frankly, from my point of view, good enough. And she set up in 2012 the College of Policing with three key roles. Firstly, to develop the knowledge, so developing the research infrastructure, building that into policing practice and standards through things like accredited practice, building an education model for individual members of the profession and educational requirements for both entry and throughout particular key points in the profession, and developing what we've called, or what they've called, authorized professional practice, and publishing it, because a key part of being a profession is transparency and being clear with the public that you serve exactly what the standards are and why they are the standards. So there's the College of Policing model, very much a modern professional body, a body that stood separate from the Home Office, but obviously to start off with was very much funded by the Home Office. My own aim was that it should be at least half funded by the membership. I'd say that hasn't fully come about. and it still remains one of the tensions, and it's one of the real challenges of this, is to create a body that is sufficiently independent that it can make key independent judgments, whilst at the same time being sufficiently accountable. So, because in policing you absolutely have to be publicly accountable, sufficiently accountable that the public have confidence that it's not the producer making their own rules. One of the key strands, one of the key strands was that it should be evidence-based, and it was evidence-based right from the start. So in undertaking the review of police leadership and training, and by the way, you can find the documents, they're all available on the web. We made sure that the review itself was underpinned by rapid evidence reviews, and then those were developed into systematic reviews of what works in police leadership, what works in police training. I have to say both of those are lamentably poorly supported by high quality research, and that one of the things that the body would seek to do would be to become a what works centre for all aspects of policing, and that has happened, and in particular around what works in terms of reducing crime and disorder. And the third element of it was that it would develop a police qualification framework. And the aim of this was to create a framework that would be not just about promotion. So this diagram is trying to give some indication of that direction. So the big line in the center is effectively the line of someone's career. On the bottom of it is the type of qualifications required for various stages of both command and also for various stages of specialist operation. So whether it be as a supervisor, a middle manager, a superintendent, as a senior leader, or through to a chief officer. And with that, the process of command being seen very much as related to people's training and ability, not necessarily to their rank, which has been a key battle within the UK, which has to some extent been won. And then on the top of it, ranging from initial entry and qualification through to specialism, and developing streams for individual officers who don't necessarily want to seek promotion, but do want to be the best in their field, whether it be as a firearms officer or a roads policing officer, or as an investigator. And those have become particularly important as UK police forces have developed direct routes, for example, for recruitment into investigator. In respect of the initial police qualification, I didn't use the D word, degree. It becomes a very, very contested territory if you do. I tried very hard to get people onto the idea that the initial qualification was setting exactly that, a qualification that was appropriate to policing. The fact that eventually, as the College of Policing worked it forward, it came out as a police constable degree apprenticeship. And apprenticeship in UK terms means that the employer pays a levy into a pot, and that pot is used to provide the training. And the apprenticeship element of it is that it's an on-the-job piece of training in which the recruits have to train on the job whilst they're getting a degree that is related to their profession, and then have to pass out with an endpoint assessment of the skills that they've gained and demonstrate that they've done so. And that has pretty much gone across the profession in UK policing. At the same time, other training programs like the police use of firearms have been developed into from a PEQF framework into a post framework, a professional framework of accreditation linked to approved professional practice, which has been published. Likewise with the process of becoming a sergeant. So one of the key steps in policing is to move from being a frontline officer into being a frontline supervisor. For quite some time, the direction of travel was, since the Victorian era, the direction of travel was to have an exam, a national examination to qualify. That's remained. You do need to have a very significant level of knowledge to qualify as a sergeant. You need particularly to understand the detailed regulations that govern the process of taking someone into custody, that govern the process of the exercise of powers. And without that, it's really very difficult to be effective. But alongside that, you need the skills to do the job effectively. And those were being developed by workplace-based assessment to complete the qualification, with the added process of a training program accredited for roles such as custody sergeant, or indeed detective sergeant, which is a professionalised investigation program. So we had, even prior to my review, over the previous 20 years, been developing a program to professionalise our investigations. It arose out of a series of scandals in the 1980s and 1990s about confession, the approach to investigation being fundamentally around confession. And this PIP program was designed to move investigators away from that towards a more professional, broader ranged process of investigation, incorporating new approaches to both interrogation and interviewing of witnesses, as well as the gathering of forensic evidence. And to do so, building a process that went from initial police learning through to the most complex investigations, and at each stage requiring a distinct qualification, and that distinct qualification, as we've gone forward with the College of Policing, being pegged to national level qualifications that would be equivalent to other professions, such as a level 6 or level 7 qualification, which is equivalent to a degree or a master's degree. And also trying at the same time to build on and transform the qualifications for senior leadership. There's been a continuing and ongoing debate, which the pandemic has undoubtedly disrupted, over the extent to which all newly promoted superintendents, all newly promoted senior leaders, and in England and Wales policing terms, a superintendent is a very significant rank. Most superintendents will have 200 to 300 staff working for them, and it seemed to me to be a role that required at least a master's level of qualification. I more or less have won that debate, but it's not yet been put into a requirement. What has been put in is a broad requirement that in order to move from superintendent to chief officer, you would require that level of qualification. And by implication, that's probably going to work its way back to encouraging people to obtain that level. And it's been particularly important in the light of a national cadre of direct entry superintendents coming in. And it's what the processes of the Police Educational Qualification Framework has allowed us to do is to slot in, for example, a refined process for the qualification of chief officers. So we'd had for a long time a senior national assessment centre and a strategic command course. Now those processes are being upgraded to fit into the model, and in particular with some considerable consideration for a level 8, so a professional doctorate qualification as an option within or post the strategic command course, preparing people for the most complex level of senior leadership. And that's the senior command course that at the time when I was preparing this presentation. This is an incredibly important group for the organisation. If the professional model doesn't extend to the most senior leadership and that level of the organisation effectively breaks away from it, then the model isn't working. So in those terms, it's important that the operational leadership and organisational leadership approach, the personal leadership and the strategic partnerships, which form the core part of the strategic command course, fit in and have a relationship with the wider professional model that we've been seeking to develop. At the end of the day, the police leader part of this enterprise needs in itself to be built around better evidence. I've just been reviewing for the National Academy of Sciences in the USA the evidence on what works for the police to sustain the rule of law. And I have to say one of the weakest parts of that was the level of research on effective strategies for police leadership that might help us to do that. There are a few things, and these key requirements that I've set out in this slide begin to develop those. So challenging practice with evidence, far too infrequently done. vision for turning activities into outcomes, I think that requires you to understand the mechanisms and therefore the evidence for those mechanisms. Values and ethics, there is one aspect of the evidence base, in particular, the pursuance of procedural justice strategies inside policing organisations, which is very much related to values and ethics and does appear to produce better outcomes. Effective adaptive leadership styles. There's been 20 years of leadership fads in policing that haven't been underpinned by evidence, with police leaders being asked to be transformational when the evidence suggests that has some serious flaws in policing, and also that leadership needs to be international. The obvious question is, what impacts, what outcomes are you expecting from a professional model? We started to develop those in the review, but on reflection, looking back at what is now over a decade of development since my review, I think these are three of the things I would hope that we could document. I'm not sure the tracking has been in place to do that, but the educational framework with a new focus on evidence-based approaches to crime reduction and problem solving should produce a better skilled workforce for the core tasks of tackling crime and disorder reduction. Frankly, police officers who aren't educated in problem solving are missing a massive trick. Problem solving on the systematic review that the Campbell Collaboration published last year reduces crime and disorder by an average of 35%. And it really is crazy for any police officer not to understand problem solving. The new framework has a clearer career and skills development approach to police officers and staff. It should be more transparent as to what it is that you're required to do if you want to advance or if you want to develop your specialist skills. So therefore, I think the outcome of a career development approach for all staff that this can form part of is important. Police officers will stay in the service and continue to develop as opposed to stand still and not, if they think there are things areas where they can gain, develop and pursue a career over a longer period of time. And then finally, a professional framework of skills and leadership development seems to me to be absolutely fundamental to improving the performance of police for the public. Without effective leadership and leadership skills development, it seems to me most unlikely that policing will deliver for the public over the long term. And I'll stop there.